Eric, welcome back. It's been 3 weeks or so since we've recorded our last podcast. How are you doing?
Doing great, other than the cold weather and snow that we ended up getting up here in Toronto. How about you?
Yeah, I think everybody's had a little bit too much snow. But anyway, let's have some fun. I want to talk about agentic process automation. As we described 3 weeks ago, um, we felt it was something that could make a big difference, especially for customers that are in what I'll call brownfield environments where they've got a bunch of systems and they're making choices about how to think about integration and automation and agentic workflows, and everybody's got them. Every system that you can buy has agentic workflows built in, but they're limited to the system. And so let's come back to it. We got a lot more to say than we did 3 weeks ago. And how do you want to get started?
Well, I think first off, I think it's going to be an exciting discussion. Agents, all you got to do is look at the news, and you can see agents are taking the developer world by storm. Why?
Yeah.
They're supercharging developer productivity, and they're even extending into business tasks. Now they started with chatbots, ChatGPT, went to Claude Code and OpenClaw. But here's the thing: is these things are all personal agents. They run under your own ID. They have your own permissions. They have access to your resources. But if we want these things to be full participants in a business process, I think we need to think about these agents a little differently. First off, I'll just differentiate very simply: coding agents versus enterprise agents. And then I think that's going to launch into a discussion around what is an enterprise agent? How do we actually have it participate in a business process, John?
Yeah. Okay. Good. Well, so we did a podcast about how to think of the two types of agents differently, but there's been a lot more that we've had to say and talked about since then. I think one of the things that I want to dig back into that I said 3 weeks ago was sort of a nascent discussion. In 3 weeks, a lot has changed around knowledge management and how we talk about whatever we call it, but that layer of context, of data, of digital assets, and all of
Hmm.
those
Hmm.
things. The conversation has evolved significantly. And like you said, that mischievous OpenClaw got out there and people were using personal agents and did did horrible things. And so we need to separate the governance conversation between what is in the enterprise and what people are experimenting with, because we would not recommend people experiment in the way a lot of hackers are experimenting now, not in the enterprise.
Yeah, I think first off, all the stuff that we're seeing with OpenClaw, I think it's opening a lot of eyes. First off, I think we're also hearing some interesting stories around what you may not want to have happen with it. We're also seeing some incredible innovations. But I come back to it. I think that there's a big difference between what you do on your own time, on your own machine, in your own environment, that compared to what's going to happen in the enterprise. So I think there's a few things that I would mention. I want to make a very clear distinction between the two as we talk about. But once we get into the enterprise, there's a lot of requirements that enterprises expect these agents to have. Plus, there's also a
Yeah.
foundation. You mentioned knowledge engineering, governance that actually needs to take in place. So I think we got a pretty meaty discussion that we're going to have today.
Okay. So, dude, so many places to start. Where do we want to get the ball rolling?
Well, let's dig in a little bit on the personal agents. And I think it's
Okay.
important to understand why they are taking the world by storm and why they are so powerful. And then a deep dive around kind of what does it mean to be a personal agent and what are some of the shortfalls. So I think so first off, we talked about the evolution. There's chatbots moving to Cloud Code and OpenClaw. They all are personal agents and they run under your own credentials. They access your resources, typically only personal resources that you have access to, or public resources, I suppose. They also have a user interface. Um, Whether it's Claude Code, you have a terminal based. You can also get with Claude Cowork, you can get some user interface. But fundamentally, the personal agents at work at your behest, and they do the things that you want them to do. You interact with them, guide them as necessary, and that provides an incredible, rather, user experience. But it does impose some constraints. The most obvious constraints is we have a user interface. But if I look at business processes today and the applications, yes, there may be some user interface, but largely these enterprise applications have significant components that run in the background. They're ambient. They don't have a user interface. So I think there's that's probably the very first clear differentiator that I would suggest. One is it's that they have a different operating profile, John.
So I think what you said is very clear. I think what you said is that personal agents have a user experience and it's well developed, whereas business processes actually happen in the background. They're headless or they're ambient or they happen inside Salesforce or Workday. They happen inside the code and you don't see them other than when you're asking them, when it is asking a question on a screen. When you're asking a user to fill out, is that what you were saying? Or did I misunderstand?
No, I
Because
think
I want to be on the same page.
that's exactly right. Let's contrast how enterprise business processes work. So you mentioned Salesforce's Workday, ServiceNow, and although there are user interfaces, if you
Yeah,
want to create a ticket, you use ServiceNow. There's a user interface, obviously, but once that ticket's created, there's a bunch of stuff that happens in the background. Whether the batch process online or event driven, there's
yeah,
stuff that happens in the background. These are enterprise applications. And these enterprise applications function in the background, but they have certain expectations. They need to be secure, need to be trusted. Now we'll talk about that in a moment here, but that's the key difference is they run
right.
in the background. They're ambient, to use that term, and yes, they process user requests, but they also process application requests, and they interact with each other. And they do this all behind the scenes. And that's the difference. So personal agent does stuff. Yes, it operates a little bit behind the scenes on your own computer, and maybe in using some public
Yeah,
resources. But it operates explicitly at your behest. Whereas in the enterprise business process, the applications, and we'll talk about the difference between the enterprise applications, the agents in a moment here, but
yeah,
but
yeah.
they run in the background and they don't they do respond partially to some requests, but there's a lot of stuff that happens in the background.
Right. And I like the way you're framing that because we trust Salesforce and Workday and SAP and all of these great ServiceNow and all the great companies because they've built a trusted software platform that we've all come to use as we move to SaaS based products. So it's trusted now, which is a very different scenario than how we're trusting personal agents. And so we're going to have to get to that level of trust that a SaaS system has established if we're going to build agents that run in the background in the enterprise. Am I connecting the dots between what you're
Absolutely.
saying?
Yeah. No, absolutely. Let me kind of even elaborate on that. We believe that there'll be
Yeah, yeah.
thousands of agents in every enterprise. So there's two facets to the challenge. Trust is fundamental. Just like we trust Salesforce or we trust Workday,
Yeah.
the agents that operate in the business process need to be trusted. The second challenge, though, is if there's going to be thousands or millions of these things potentially in every enterprise, this is a problem of scale. And with any problem of scale,
Yeah.
you need to figure out how you're going to collaborate and interact. And that's where these agents will operate or act in an ecosystem. Now, here's the interesting part is the
Yeah.
interactions of these agents will align to business processes. And that's why we call this agentic process automation. Agents will be full participants in the enterprise business process. They will work side by side with people, augmenting their capability. They'll be working behind the scenes, just like any other enterprise application. So that's the key difference, and why we think this term around agentic process automation, where agents are full participants in the business process, is actually the right terminology for what we're talking about, John.
And I went back and listened to our podcast 3 weeks ago, and one of the things that I said then that I think is bears repeating is that we never expected, I gave the example of 3 or 4 SaaS systems trying to interoperate. The reason they each operate differently is they're all created by different vendors. There's not a one single interoperability standard that says, "I'm gonna call customers this," or leads, or phone calls, or, you know, uh, all of the nouns and verbs, right? That's not, although the English language is sort of, standardized, the way business systems interact is not standardized. And so I said at the time that you have to pick one, or it in I said in a lot of cases, projects end up picking one because you have a lot of architects that understand, say, Salesforce or AWS Connect or SAP. And so that becomes the dominant vocabulary that we use to describe things. But it also, with what you're saying, it also becomes, it can be the dominant security model or integration model. Because, I remember this in the olden days where we had to integrate these systems, and who do you trust to be the trusted framework? And I think that's the question that we were being asked by that other customer, that, hey, do I trust ServiceNow because they're going to have the open standard agent ecosystem framework, or do I trust Salesforce, or do I trust, da 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 da? And so I think I just want to relate it back to what I said then is there isn't an arbiter in the middle that says this is the standard for agentic ecosystems. And that's why I just want to do a shout out for your book. It's so great that it's finally went to print so that people can read more about how we framed the agentic mesh ecosystem, in episode 1 and episode 5 and stuff. So anyway, sorry for, I'm just trying to connect a lot of dots that have been bubbling around in my head around the conversations we've had, Eric. So I hope that is additive.
I first off definitely appreciate the shout out for the book. It was published this week, the week of February 23rd. So thanks for the shout out there. But here's why I think it's actually quite relevant is um, these thousands of agents are going to organize in an ecosystem. And the ecosystem provides the services to let them interact and collaborate and even transact. But they get formulated in the context of business processes. So the agentic mesh, the title of the book, the ecosystem of agents, is actually the foundation for agentic process automation. Now, I wanted to kind of come back to one point you mentioned, which I think is actually
Bingo.
crucial. We talk about
Yeah.
the filling the white space between the SaaS vendors, because as you mentioned, are we
Yes.
going to trust
Yeah. We used
ServiceNow to
that term
build?
a lot
Yeah,
last time.
yeah. So are we gonna, for example, trust ServiceNow to build agents outside of their domain, or Salesforce? Probably not. But we do need something to join these things, and we think the very first starting point for agentic process automation is the glue that addresses the white space that binds these discrete SaaS applications into something very, very useful and connected. Now, here's the interesting thing is that white space, that is the competitive advantage that every organization has. That's the stuff that is not commodity. Not to say that everything Salesforce does or Workday is commodity, but those are common processes that span all organizations. But the stuff that is unique inside a specific organization is that white space. It is the stuff that makes a logistics company manage their supply chain better than their competitors. It's the white space, the applications that let a manufacturer build better products than somebody else, or a bank to manage the interactions and setting up of a bank account better than their competitors. It's a competitive white space that is so crucial that the agents can actually fill and address.
Okay. So dude, let me reflect that back at you because I like where this is going. So it's not that because you've implemented SAP, your supply chain is somehow better. It's standard, but it's not sufficiently better unless you optimize it, right? And so there's optimization techniques, intelligence that each company brings to its processes that are unique to them, that are the differentiator and why they're getting more value out of SaaS product 1 versus SaaS product 2 versus SaaS product 3. So that intelligence, which is captured in processes, is captured in data, which has context and all of the other the words that extend the boundaries of what we mean by knowledge. I think you're absolutely right. That is the thing that makes a business somehow different, right? It has intelligence about what it's trying to do that others don't have because it's been a logistics company for 50 years, or it had a world-class supply chain like Apple and Tim Cook and all of those stories about optimizing the supply chain. So so what you're saying, or what we are saying, is that in that white space between these systems exists the processes and the knowledge of the concepts and policies that apply to those business processes. And that's why agentic process automation, whether we call it that or not in the world, but this idea is going it already has a lot of legs, and a lot of people are talking about it, maybe not using the same words we are, but I think we're starting to see a convergence around understanding that this is the secret sauce. It's the knowledge and the ability to execute with that
Uh,
knowledge. I would argue,
no, I think you're spot on. There's three things, two things at least that I think
Yeah.
I want to have a detailed discussion on. The first one is um,
Okay.
why agents why agents as the glue that binds the things, why agentic process automation versus something else. I'm not here to have a discussion around why RPA or BPA may be broken. We did that in the past.
Yeah.
People know the challenges, but here's why I think agents are ideal for injection and full participation in the business process. The analogy is exactly like what we had in the very first episode, and agents are kind of like people. So I want to draw that analogy again.
Yeah. Yeah.
People that participate in a business process can deal with ambiguity. So can agents, especially as LLMs are getting better and better. People in a business process can handle unstructured input and make sense of a PDF or a spreadsheet. LLMs and agents can do that too now, and they can do it extremely well. People can make informed decisions. When we equip an agent with knowledge, the knowledge engineering, which is the second part of the discussion I want to have, when we equip agents with knowledge about the business, they can make informed decisions just like people. Now, the interesting thing about agents also is they do operate 7/24, which gives the opportunity for the business to do more with the people that they actually have. The last part that I would mention is in certain industries, especially in financial services and capital markets, private debt, the IP that is embodied within the enterprise is crucial. And when people leave, the IP leaves. Well, the interesting thing about the agents is we can structure things with appropriate data security and data management practices. We can maintain that IP inside the firm and inside the agents. So this is actually a very opportune time for the agent capabilities to actually come to the point where they can actually be legitimate participants in a business process. So agents, I think, are ideal, and this is the time where this is quite relevant.
Okay, good. So let's start with the first one. I want to come back to the example I gave last time, which was a very simple example. We have two systems. One was the contact center. One was the CRM system. So we would take a call. Let's assume they were that it was a human being taking a call, not a virtual agent. But you would take a call. A case would be opened automatically by the contact center software. A screen would up in front of the contact center agent, and they would fill in some details. Some of it would be transcribed. So what we had was a contact center system, and a CRM system. What I loved about the example I gave last time is they said, dude, that's simple. We'll just integrate them with the Lambda function. Now, the reason I want to say that is for all my friends out in the world using Lambda functions to integrate apps. Yes, you can, but should you? And what I want to remind everybody of how tragic that was because we tried to give intelligence into the lambda function where it had no purpose. And everybody said, well, dude, I'll just code some more rules. Or, dude, I'll just add this thing and then I'll la 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 la. And what we found, getting back to your third point, is that the brilliant engineers that knew how to create the lambda functions didn't know how to speak business English, so that there was a gap between what the business was saying in plain English and what the guys were trying to implement. And what it turned out to be is that if you knew the contact center software, you would not know all of the problems with the case management software, and vice versa. The case management guys didn't know all the problems with the contact center software. Ergo, we spent a lot of time building the world's most brittle integration, and the promise of an agent in the middle is that it can have a goal, can create a plan, it can take some actions, and we can measure them. And hopefully we can do a better job integrating business processes because the agent will be able to talk to it and say, okay, well, this is your goal. You need to open a thing on the thing, and this is how you'll know, and go do this. If we can do that, I would love to go back to that project team and see if we could have done a better job at that systems integration. And I'm sorry for stealing the mic, dude, but I love what we're proposing to do because this feels like the obvious next step in the problem of integration, right? Which I've been inadvertently part of for my whole career. You know, how do you make three systems speaking a different language communicate? Anyway, sorry to go off on a rant, but I think that's what you're saying, right? That's we're on the same page. So, Eric, the thing that I think is so appropriate about thinking of agents to do business process integration between two systems is the example I was talking about in the last episode of APA, where we tried to integrate two complex systems with different vocabularies, different data models, with Lambda functions. And the problem with the Lambda function, there's actually no problem with them. They're great for deploying Python code, and you can get code to do anything theoretically. But what we found was the challenge was getting the business to establish the goal of the integration so that the architects could understand what the business needed so that they could do it, because we had architects from Salesforce and the contact center software. And so it was very hard to reconcile that. If agents can solve that problem in a meaningful, structured way where the business can test and evaluate whether the rules that they're prompting the agents to execute, we can suddenly test business rules in a way that uh, we hadn't even thought of it before. So, anyway, that's does that make sense for the first point you were making?
Yeah, I think it's perfect. I think though what you've done is introduce some really cool new topics that I think we should explore.
Hmm.
I think it's three, and I suspect some of them are going to have to go into the next podcast. But
Of course.
knowledge engineering, the ability to obviously agents need context. That context comes from the business knowledge. Um, Let me ask you to kick this off. When we think of knowledge engineering, the ability to get the minimum viable context from a vast repository of documents, metadata, structured data, unstructured data, how do we explain knowledge engineering to me?
Okay. Well, like I said last time, knowledge management is not my domain of expertise. But what I did say, and I also said that librarians would probably hate the term engineering. So I stand by those. And I would say, I'll ask somebody else to name this category of thing that we're talking about, but let me describe it so that we can have a working model to describe what we're talking about. We all know that some of the important intelligence inside an organization that a process has to follow are reflected in policy documents and procedure documents and standard operating procedures. Well, that's often typically written in English, or, we're going to stick to the English example. So how does one take those written words and translate those into something that the agent could understand? Well, we talked about that a bit when we talked about compiling context, but it rests on an assumption which is false. And the false assumption is that we're all using the same words to use to have the same concepts, and they all have the same meaning. And that's where we uh, last time I said, even as something as simple as a taxonomy, what is a call? What's the difference between a call and a callback? Is a transfer a call? Right. In a contact center example, each of those terms have well defined meaning. Now, if you just walked in off the street and you hadn't been on a call center project or contact center project, you would probably have assumptions. Some of them would be correct. But the fact that some of them would also be incorrect means that we need to be able to solve this. What do I mean in this context problem? And so let's come back to that because that's a really fascinating place. And I think it combines data management concepts, content management concepts, knowledge management concepts, records management, if you really want to go deep, and etc. So we've often talked about this idea of corporate memory and this way of structuring. We used to pretend that a data warehouse could do that and other some such fallacies. But we're at a point where this body of knowledge or this corpus of things, whatever we name it, is important. And that's what I was saying last time. And I'll say it again that we need to mean the same things when we're talking about the same things, and that language is not easy to establish.
No, I agree, and that's why I think this is a nice meaty topic for a subsequent podcast. Let me kind of kick off the next one. Which I think this is a longer topic, also, but let's at least talk about it. So, the whole notion here is we've said that people in a business process mirror agents in a business process. Just like we have HR practices, we euphemistically call them know your employee.
Yeah.
We also are going to need know your agent or KYA processes. I think that's a whole topic, but kind of just give me your perspective on this whole KYA and trust as it relates to agents.
Okay. Well, I want to take it from a data perspective, a data and knowledge perspective, because we're I'm helping another company, or we're helping another company design their agentic system right now, and one of the things that the IT security guy said, which I was like, dude, I love that you said that out loud, is if we're going to onboard somebody in the HR system because we just hired them and we're going to give them an enterprise ID, with Azure Entra ID, then wouldn't it be fascinating if we could actually define groups that we could associate them with? This is a new company, so they have the luxury of a greenfield. And furthermore, if those groups in Azure AD or Entra ID could be associated with privileges in the database layer, wouldn't that be fun? And so, because I was wearing my snowflake hat, I was saying, yeah, yeah, here's how you do it, blah, 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 blah. And what is important in this example is important in this example of contact centers and any sort of integration project is that it usually involves people and people have user IDs. And we talked about it in our trust and governance podcast. But if we are going to solve the problem, then onboarding a human being and onboarding an agent must be solved. And it's non-trivial, right? As everybody knows, that's why ServiceNow almost exists because it was such a cluster jam in the olden days that IT service management needed to be improved. And so this idea that ServiceNow or that we can create service tickets to onboard humans means that we're going to need the same sorts of controls and processes to onboard agents and the same role-based access control, row access privileges, dynamic data masking, all of the things that we do for structured data must apply to the agent operating on behalf of the employee. So if we're gonna do know your agent, let's take all of the good ideas we've already solved and apply it to that. And so from a data guy perspective, I am just so excited that we're being forced to create a new ecosystem of identification for agents. So, hey, maybe we can, maybe that'll have some knock-on effects to how we onboard humans as well, because that's anyway. I'll stop
No, I
ranting.
think no, I think you're spot on, which is why I think this is important for a separate episode. This whole notion of KYA, know your agent, and for know your employee, we have HR practices. It almost sounds, John, like we're going to have a discussion around agent resource management.
Yeah.
So that's for another episode because I think it's a big
Okay.
one, just like knowledge engineering is. The next piece I want to talk about, and I think this is a tee up for the next episode or one of the next episode is if we're going to have agent resource practices, what do they look like? And I'll just kind of tease it a little bit, and
Sure.
then you can tell me your thoughts. But first off, you talked about onboarding. It's just like we hire people, we need to hire agents, and there's a vetting process perhaps that needs to take place. But there's definitely we need to equip them with identities and roles and access privileges, etc. There's a rubric that says, here's what good behavior or good outcomes look like. Then there's a measurement. How do we measure against that rubric to ensure the agency is doing its thing properly? And then if it's not, how do we, I'll put it in air quotes, how do we teach the agent to operate better? That's agent resource management practices, I think. Now here's the other thing
No,
is
no, just let's take a beat here and say that, oy vey, please, goodness, why another acronym, my man? But you're not wrong, but please go on.
yeah, I'll just close on this and then I'll
Yeah,
open it to you. But the other thing that we need to think about is just like people in a business process have communication challenges. Yes, we
yeah.
use the English language, but we have the broken telephone where you start with a discussion around a topic and it morphs as you talk to the next person, the next person, the next person. That's going to happen to agents. I think the other thing we're going to see is as we have ambiguity around the concepts and even the policies, um, as we start to try and figure out what the underlying meaning is, we may not understand the senses in the data. We'll have this equivalent of the parable of the three blind men and the elephant, each one touching a different part, and understanding it to be a different thing, not even a part of the elephant. That's the practical challenges that I think as we deal with agents at scale is another thing we're going to actually think about. Again, for another episode. But what do you think about that?
Okay, well, thanks for allowing me to speak too, because I've got too much to say. But let me keep it short. So I agree. And the first one is, although we can call it agent resource management, and I can imagine that means a lot of things, but I really want to keep it, or I want to also frame it in a very straightforward evaluation rubric, right? And there was a company, True Era, that was acquired by another company, and there's all kinds of great rubrics for evaluation. What I love about this one is, and I've heard Anupam Data talk about it a couple of times in the past week, so I'm slightly just stuck in my head. It's called GPA, Goals, Planning, and Action, and it's a way to evaluate agents. And so before we land the plane on agent resource management, we need to think about agent evaluation. And that's a first class topic. We'll come back to that. Second, and this happened in the past few weeks. I think it was, yeah, there it is. January 28th of this year, Google published the magic paper that some have been talking about towards a science of scaling agent systems, when and why agent systems work. And now it doesn't use the broken telephone problem, but one of the examples of coordination of agents is this error propagation between this guy makes an assumption and he says to this guy, yeah, go do this. But dude, that was never the thing you should have been doing. And I speak of it as if they're just people having a conversation, but it's a very thoughtful paper. And what was mind blowing is somebody was presenting it at a meetup 2 weeks ago while we were off. So I think as we think about process design and all of the things about multi agent systems, I think we have to recognize how errors propagate through processes and just at least acknowledge it as part of uh, the work that will happen as agents communicate because they'll have all the same fundamental issues. And so maybe it's tied to that. Maybe it's tied to how do you orchestrate hundreds of agents, but um, it's a fun time and tune in next time because
Well, yeah, well,
these keep getting better every week as we learn more about how the world is able to at least take a shot at solving some of these things.
so I think what we're saying, John, is this whole agentic process automation. We're going to have a series of discussions on this because A, it's relevant, but it's an interesting topic, and I think so quite appropriate for what's happening in the industry. So this is really exciting, and I'm really looking forward to the next few episodes, my friend.
Yeah, I know. Maybe we can record a bunch of them and get a bunch of thoughts on the air and then take another week off. I love the time off. Anyway, dude, until next time,
Awesome. Thank you, sir.
take care. Cheers.